Welcome to the Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art for our artist panel discussion this evening. Before we get started, my name is Sarah Justice. I'm the Executive Director here at the Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art. And the Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art inspires, promotes through contemporary arts, through exhibitions, collections, events, and educational programming. We're really excited to have our audience here with us this evening. I will introduce our artists that are visiting with us today and for this artist panel discussion. And these artists have come in. So we've got Bruce Crownover, we have Todd Anderson, who's also a woodblock print artist, who is a professor at Clemson University in South Carolina. And then we have Ian Van Kohler, who is a professor at Montana State University in Bozeman, and he's a photographer. These amazing artists are here with us this evening to talk to us about their work, their years of study, their relationships to one another, and share a bit about their processes and why the environment is so important to them and in their work. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our curator, Nicole Maria Evans, who has so thoughtfully brought these artists in during a time when we have some other exhibitions on view. Peter Koch, the book is a work of art, and also your friend Ranger Doug. And the beauty is these exhibitions all work side by side and hold hands together in a wonderful conversation. This lecture series has been going on for a while, and so this is the last lecture series for the summer. Okay, that's right. We have your friend Ranger Doug coming up. So this is the second or third, I think, at this point. Anyway, Nicole, come on up. Talk to us a little bit more about how you brought these artists in and your thoughts behind that, and then get it going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for welcoming all of us. Thank you for our guests, and thank you to the artists for being here. And I am the curator of collections and exhibitions here at Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art. What I'm going to do at this moment is kind of frame the discussion for a second to give a brief understanding about what the idea is, but the artists themselves will be really taking apart the process for their projects. So before we continue with this, I just also want to give thanks to MSU Bozeman, the archives at MSU Bozeman, for lending the Last Glacier artist book to us. And I also want to give thanks to Pat Roth at the Hockaday Museum of Art for bringing the Last Glacier collective to Montana last year in December during the COVID period. And that is where I became aware of their amazing artwork and their collective. And thank you to the artists themselves for also sharing one of their newer projects, which is Sentinels. So thank you again. And there's lots of thank yous because there's so many people involved in bringing all the art to everyone's attention. In brief, I will let you know that this is live streamed. So for those of you who are out there in the virtual world, please be patient with us and understand that there may be hiccups and there may be some strange little happenings here and there. Oh no. And now you're meeting the crew. One is quite sassy. So just have patience with us. And I'm going to read a little bit here, and then we're going to continue and begin our panel. Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art presents an inspired selection of works created by the Last Glacier Collective Artist Group. Through their work, the artists honor and bring attention to areas of environmental concern. The Last Glacier Project and Sentinels are two special exhibitions that are shown in contiguity with one another. Both offer insightful, noteworthy, and moving images, accompanied with scientific research that highlight and comment on the changing environment. The presentation of these exhibitions at Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art features a selection of works that honor these artists. Focused photographs by Ian Van Kohler are shown alongside the richly layered and textured reductive woodcut prints by Todd Anderson and Bruce Crownover. Included in this special exhibition of the work are two featured artist books. Excuse me for a second here. The Last Glacier and Romo, Rocky Mountain National Park. These books are limited in number and found only in special collections. They are the culmination of the project's work and are exquisitely bound. And at the close of this panel discussion, there will be a special in-person viewing of the Sentinels book that the artists have so kindly brought to this panel discussion, as it is a new, complete work. The Last Glacier project and Sentinels are presented by the Square and are supported in part by the Montana Arts Council, a state agency funded by the state of Montana, Humanities Montana, National Endowment for the Humanities, Exploring the Human Endeavor, and National Endowment for the Arts. Additional funding is provided by museum members and the citizens of Cascade County, and generous support from Davidson Family Foundation, First Interstate Bank, and D.A. Davidson. Special support from Montana Woman Magazine, and a special anonymous donor as well. So thank you so much, and we will go ahead and begin our panel discussion. We're going to divide it into two segments. We will begin with the Last Glacier project, and we will end with Sentinels. So having said that,
I'm first.
Ian, introduce yourself.
We discussed this at lunch.
Okay.
Give it a short straw.
The person who struggles with anxiety has to go first, right? So. My name is Ian Van Coller. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Nicole, for having us, and thank you to the Paris Gibson. If you notice, I have an accent. Originally, I'm from South Africa. I have been in the US now 30 years. My mother's from New Jersey, and I've lived in Bozeman for 18 years. So I've been asked to give the origin story of the project, which really is this guy's fault right here. So, yeah. So we're pretty much a decade of working on glacier-related climate change projects. And it started around 2011, 2012. So 2011, Todd, who is a good friend of mine from grad school, I don't know if you emailed me or called me, I think he emailed me, and asked if I wanted to join him hiking into Glacier National Park to start documenting the last remaining glaciers in the park. So, I didn't know much about it. At the time, I was working on projects in South Africa, where I'm from, and it happened in 2011. I was busy on a project and I couldn't join him. But, he told me the story of how, at the turn of the 20th century, there were 135 glaciers left in the park. And currently, in 2011, we're down to 25. So it was this dramatic reduction in the number of glaciers, and that, he wanted to go and try to make photographs of them, try to illustrate them, and try to interpret them in some artistic way. So, and Bruce, I had met Bruce in Madison, Wisconsin. I don't know what year that was, lost count, right?
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah, we met.
Suffice to say.
Yeah, we met separately, but these guys were close friends for a long time. And Todd and I became friends in grad school, and I had met Bruce. So we sort of all knew each other. Anyway, 2011, they started hiking into the backcountry of Glacier National Park, and I couldn't join them. I was working on another project. Anyway, we decided to spread it out over 3 years, or 4 years, 3 years, yep. And I was able to join them in 2012, and there's nothing that any of us love more than hiking in the backcountry, hiking into the mountains. And for me, personally, making work in South Africa was getting more difficult, just logistically. It was very expensive, and I felt like it had run its course. And so my home, I felt like moving to Montana was in the mountains, fly fishing, hiking in the mountains. And so I was on board. And so that summer, I think we did almost 200 miles. Yeah. So the objective was just to get to as many glaciers as we could. And Todd had a plan, right? This glacier, this glacier, this glacier, this glacier. So we had a couple of backcountry permits, and we tried to get to those. I don't know how many of you guys have spent a lot of time hiking into Glacier National Park, but none of the glaciers are very close. So it takes, you can see some of them from the road, like Jackson Glacier, and you can see Blackfoot Glacier. But I think possibly the closest glacier you can hike to is Sexton Glacier, and that's about 12 miles. So, well, 6 miles in, 6 miles out. So 12 miles round trip is like the closest glacier, even though, as a park, it seems like they should be closer. So, as friends, it was this incredible experience of reconnecting through the landscape, and we had some trials and travails of bushwhacking to nothing. What was the glacier we were trying? White Vulture or Vulture Glacier, where we got stuck at Nashukin Lake up on the Canada border.
Yeah.
Anyway. So we, one particular trip we took the water taxi south from Canada across the lake, and we were trying to get to a glacier, and we spent, I think, a day and a half or 2 days bushwhacking through the most ridiculous stuff. And so we found that a lot of the glaciers were going to be completely inaccessible and difficult to get to. In the end, over the course of 3 years, we were able to at least observe and get close enough to photograph 15 of the 25 remaining glaciers. Some of the others were just very distant, away in the backcountry, and just to our abilities, beyond our abilities to get to. And during those times hiking, we started thinking about, what's the objective of this project? And I have a history of making books, artist books, and I thought that, as a specific geographic location, that an artist's book would be an ideal way to encapsulate this body of work. So it would become this book that is a vision of a specific place at a specific time from the viewpoint of 3 different artists. And so in 2015, we finally produced a limited edition artist book. That's the book that's in the exhibition. That really started what is now just over a decade's worth of work. And since then, we have traveled individually, as well as sometimes Todd and myself, sometimes the 3 of us, depending on where we're going, to try to document changing landscapes in different parts of the planet. So in 2019, the 3 of us were in Baffin Island. Also in 2019, Todd and I went to Antarctica as part of a National Science Foundation artist program to document the oldest ice on Earth, being drilled by scientists from Princeton and Scripps. And I've personally, on my own, been to Kilimanjaro, and then Todd and I were in Uganda in the Ruwenzoris. So we're trying to urgently document these rapidly changing landscapes and somehow visually preserve them before they change so much that they're gone. The ice is transient. And so that's sort of the origin story of the project. I just want to reiterate Nicole's prompt. If you guys have questions, we really respond well to questions. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
No, it's a really nice synopsis, Ian. Yeah.
Okay, I'm done. I'm gonna drink my beer.
Todd, do you want to kind of give a little bit of insight into the art, each are different artists, and you have your own method and how you come together to create these projects. And what's that like for the three of you in terms of how you work, and what your own visual aesthetic is towards creating this one book project? What is that like?
I guess for me, I kind of think of these projects, so kind of going back to what Ian was talking about, three unique kind of visions, but there's always a fourth or a fifth, which are the scientists that work with us. And so I think that in terms of the artworks themselves, I think that I can safely say for all three of us, they're really anchored in, first and foremost, the beauty of the place we're at. And so if there's an entrance point to the artwork, we're trying to communicate just the pure wonder of these places. But when somebody looks at the book and reads the scientific essay that our scientists, different scientists will write for these books, talks about what it is you're actually looking at. So it's not just a glacier, but it's a glacier that's been here, that's helped shape the valley that you might be, in Glacier National Park over, thousands and thousands of years, but now it's disappearing. And what are the consequences of that? And so when we look at the artworks again with fresh eyes, like this juniper tree in Bears Ears National Monument, knowing that those things are disappearing, how does that change the way in which we look at the world around us? I think art, it doesn't always happen, but I think that art has the unique ability to help us see the world in different ways. And I think art has the ability to help audiences linger just a little bit longer and a little bit more openly about different topics that can be really challenging. When climate science is quite challenging. The only thing I would add to Ian's really nice synopsis is that we really follow the science. So it's consensus-based science. We really rely on scientists to help us understand what's happening in different parts of the planet. And then we really follow in the wake of those scientists, but trying to bring something wholly unique to that conversation. So we're trying to a certain degree to be bridges between art and science as well. So.
A quick question on that is, so if you're working with scientists or pairing up with them, do you make a decision on what you're wanting to study first and then find scientists that are researching, or is it the other way around?
It's a little bit of both, because we don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not illustrators, of the world. We're artists with our own unique vision of what we're seeing of the world, and that won't necessarily marry with what a scientist's vision is, or different parts of the planet we might go to. We're always working on projects. I'm working on a project right now in Florida, and the first trip was, well, I'm going to go see and see if I can see this artistically, because this might not work at all. The scientists who wanted to do this project on tracking water in Everglades, like, I don't know if I can do that landscape, So there's kind of a readiness to want to do that, but sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think, in the beginning, there weren't any scientists involved. We didn't know any scientists.
Yeah.
So it was a matter of going into the landscape and interpreting the landscape from our own particular perspectives. Mm-hmm. And, as the project developed, there was, this increasing interest of, well, what is it that we don't know about the landscape? We are artists and we're not trained in sort of glaciology or geology, and what do these people know that could help us impart further meaning and depth into the artwork? Mm-hmm. And so, fairly early on into the project, around 2015, started to seek out scientists who could bring their expertise and their sort of layers of knowledge into the project in different ways.
Mm-hmm. And are you producing some of the writing in the books at all? Or is it more information for you guys so you really get a full depth of what you're...
So, none of us have done any writing. No. The scientists are doing all the writing.
Yeah.
Yes. because we are not the experts. And as I usually preface my talks, I am not a scientist.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot from the scientists, but I always defer to their expertise. And so, yeah, the sort of as an encapsulation of the larger project, we try to make basically sort of an historic archive of a particular place at a particular time. So we choose a geographic location based on research that is rapidly changing. We try to get funding to go there. We go there, we photograph it, we sketch it, we paint it, and then the result is this encapsulation in book form that hopefully preserves in some form that landscape as it existed at that particular time. We do not write about that. We try to find people who know that landscape, who can then impart their knowledge about what they know about that place as part of the sort of overall project.
And it seems like it's really opened up kind of what we do, in my mind anyway, moving forward. Now that we have this idea that we want to bring scientists in or writers in, I think it kind of changes the way that I approach what we do. I mean, in the very beginning, it really was just about, let's go there because we want to be there, we want to see this, and I like to backpack. I hadn't been there in a long time, I like to paint outside. But I was so overwhelmed by the landscape and trying to make a postcard-sized painting of this enormous, thing that it was something that just seemed so overwhelming in the beginning. But over time it became like, oh, we can do this, we can find places, we can find a way in visually into these things, and then we can bring scientists or writers on board. And it seems like it's become, serious is not necessarily the right word, but it's taken on a bit of a sort of a gravitas to have these other people involved in it, people who are really dedicating their lives to the science behind all this stuff, that are interested in collaborating with artists. And there's a long history of artists and scientists collaborating. So the idea that that's what we want to see happen in our work is not unusual. So we've been very lucky to find good writers, good scientists, and especially I think with these guys who are in Antarctica, from what I've learned about it through these guys anyways, that there's some really cutting edge kind of information coming out of the science that they're doing, and that they were there at the time. I mean, it's really a remarkable thing to be put in that position, and same with us going into Glacier and seeing this at this really critical time. It's very important, I think, to what we're doing. To be there in the right place at the right time makes a big difference. But
Yeah, so as Bruce refers to, so in 2019, Todd and I, after several years of trying, got a grant through the government, the National Science Foundation, to join a team in a place called the Allen Hills in Antarctica. And in 2015, a similar team, some of the same members, but professors from Princeton, from the University of Maine,
Portland State. Portland State.
Anyway.
Yep.
So
Oregon State, Portland. Yeah.
it's this unique geographic, geologic space that, because of the constant ablation from the wind that scours the surface of the glacier, and the way that the ice is pushed up against the trans-Antarctic mountains, the ice is particularly old. And previous to this research, the oldest ice that had been retrieved by drilling an ice core was 800,000 years old on the West Antarctic ice sheet. And in the Allen Hills in 2015, they retrieved ice that was 2.7 million years old. So exceptionally old ice. We were able to join a team in 2019 at the same location, and their intent was to replicate the research, but also hopefully find older ice. And so just this last week, Todd and I have been in touch with John Higgins, who is the lead researcher from Princeton University. And their research is showing that the ice from that expedition is 3 to 4 million years old. So this is of particular interest to scientists, because this is the period that we have an archive of Earth's atmosphere when the CO2 content is very similar to what it is today, about 415 parts per million. So from this research, hopefully, they will be able to make some correlations between what our future might look like with this kind of carbon content and what it was 3 million to 3.3 million years ago when there was a similar kind of atmosphere. So super fascinating.
The interesting thing is there'll be a lag too of, it's usually almost a year before these things get released to the public because it takes so much time for it to work its way through the journals. But yeah, it's fascinating and really important research that's being done. Yeah.
I'm curious, and this question is particularly on Glacier, but you know, the Blackfeet consider Glacier Park a very sacred place, and I was wondering if the native spirituality had any influence on your art and on your work.
It's for Sentinels, it's the project Bruce and a scientist by the name of Gary Mackless, who just now finished up, and that's the book we'll be flipping through here in a little bit. And that project was focused on Bears Ears National Monument and Grand Staircase National Monument. And so part of that work, right, is it's not really the case, but it is the case that when we go to these places, we're taking from these spaces, you know, whether it's Bears Ears or it's Glacier National Park. And so how is it that we give back, and how is it that we pay gratitude to those who've held these places sacred, folks that continue to hold these places as sacred, and those who will see these places as sacred. And so part of that's acknowledgement within a book itself, but it's also doing outreach. So it's taken many years to kind of get here to Paris Gibson Square, but that's part of, it feels like coming home to a certain degree of coming back to the community. This coming spring we'll be going to southern Utah and working with school kids at different community schools, including tribal reservations, to talk about this work that we're doing there. But it's a really important thing that you bring up, and it's something that we're really cognizant of. One other kind of thing I should mention is Ian did a large book on Kilimanjaro, which I've contributed a piece to, and it was interesting to watch it from an outsider's perspective, but maybe you can comment, Ian. But that book kind of evolved into almost a documentation of those who are kind of helping him as well get up the mountain. So it seems to be a book that marries portraits of Sherpas, not Sherpas, but guides, mountain guides, and those who are kind of helping the community with the mountain itself. So it's something that's really on our mind as when we work. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, and it's definitely personally something that I feel like I could think about more. But I would say that I don't know any Blackfeet people, and to try, I mean, I grew up in South Africa during apartheid, so there's, for me, a deep consciousness of where I stand as a white male South African, and what that means in the sort of the politics of the history of that country. And so coming to Glacier and trying to maybe place myself in the space of a Blackfeet person, I would say that that wasn't part of, for me, the art making process. I didn't feel like I had the place to take that on. Todd mentions the Kilimanjaro project, and so in that project, I made a very, very large book. It opens to 50 inches wide, and so when I was, climbing up the mountain, you have to go with a guide service. You have to employ these guys to help you go up. And I was with a scientist, and there were 2 white guys and 30 Tanzanian guides and porters helping us get all the science gear and all the kitchen sink up the mountain, right? Literally the kitchen sink. And so for me, it was this kind of re-experience, this kind of colonial experience of being in South Africa when I was younger. It was very uncomfortable for me, and I was very conscious of that. And so the project became this about the portraits of the men who helped us get up the mountain in relationship to the landscape that they depend on for their livelihood. These glaciers that are rapidly melting. And what does that mean for their livelihood once they're gone, which they're going to be gone within the next 30, 40 years. And so that was sort of the only place that I felt comfortable taking that kind of background on. So I couldn't say in terms of Glacier National Park that was part of my consciousness in making the work. I was really making the work from my own perspective and experience.
Go ahead, Alma.
Yeah, I just heard on the radio that a Texas judge released a Louisiana company to utilize their oil lease
Yeah.
to medicine. So,
Right. I heard the same thing.
To me, it was so shocking to think that this sacred land is now being embroiled in a national issue. And I think of the power of your vision already being placed in motion, because this sacred area might have a landscape totally different in a few years, depending upon the national battle.
Right.
So, with corporate America coming in and changing what we might see, can really change the landscape and might influence. Luckily, we haven't recorded from your work that the beauty of this place, but it could soon change. Apparently, you heard the news.
Yeah, no, I obsessively listen to NPR, so. It's the two medicine issue is incredibly depressing, and it just seems crazy that you can take this place that is sacred to people and go and continue our extractive industries and change that landscape. It just makes no sense at all. So yeah, I don't have any kind of comeback at it. It's just devastating.
So my thoughts now perhaps are to kind of, since we had such a wonderful conversation about your projects, was to also now gear towards Sentinels a bit, so we can talk about that project and kind of how the two of you, you're a collaborative, however, then you participate with other individuals, and maybe you can speak a little bit about that. Do you want to take that, Bruce?
Yeah, sure. I guess it was another case where Todd came up with an idea and invited me to go along and just be there and see what we can see. But the idea was the trees, the juniper, western juniper and pinyon pine trees are being affected by the climate crisis, and they're migrating, and there's a leading edge of these trees that are called sentinel trees as they start to move north to find more water. And the juniper, I guess, are thriving, and the pinyon are not doing so well. Well, we wanted to go sort of see for ourselves and find out what we could learn from just being there. So really it was another process of going. That's the first step, is we've got to get somewhere. So we would go backpacking and car camping and walking around and painting and photographing and just becoming really familiar with that landscape. There was a few instances, I think, of sort of aha moments for me, where we were in this landscape and I could see very clearly these dying trees. And this is an area of the country that I'm very familiar with. I hadn't been there in a long, long time. But all these memories started coming back to me as a child, playing in this part of southern Utah, and really starting to recognize within myself that it has changed so much over my lifetime, and wanting to kind of become more in touch with how I feel about that. And for me, it's really about sitting in a place for as long as I possibly can and trying to absorb the light and the colors and the smell and just the whole, take in the whole scene. And then the work really takes off when I get back into my studio. But I think it was really just also your friend Gary, a colleague and friend of Todd's at Clemson, has been in the forestry department and knew a bit about these trees, I guess, and had brought to you some of the science behind it. So that's kind of where it started. But again, it took on a life of its own. Let's turn these into big prints. Let's find a way to turn them into a book and find somebody that can write about it. And I think Gary's contribution to that book is particularly important when you read his text. And the way he called them word paintings, he wants to really fit in to the work as an artist and not just a writer, which I think he did successfully. But that's kind of, so it really began with this idea that I think Todd had learned that this was happening, and we're like, we want to see it. So we, just how do we get there? So, yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about Gary's role and how how he is kind of, because when we were first talking, we were talking about how the scientists play this informational role and these writing roles, giving you factual information. Can you talk about Gary, because it's different in a way?
Yeah. So Gary is Gary Mackless. He's he was the first ever appointed science advisor to the National Park System. So he would report directly underneath the superintendent of the National Park System in D.C. So he's somebody I met by chance at my university, at Clemson University. And it was, long story short, John Reynolds, I believe his name was the park superintendent of not Joshua Tree, but Death Valley National Park. And that's someplace I wanted to work because I had kind of learned a little bit about some of the things that were happening in Death Valley. And so I was trying to meet John, and I ran into Gary, and I said, can I meet him? Because Gary seemed to be involved in this group. He said, why do you want to meet him? And I told him what I did. And he said, we should work together. And then I subsequently find out that this is a really important person. and so getting back to Glacier National Park a little bit, one of the reasons we're focused on Bears Ears National Monument and Grand Staircase is that it's fairly contested spaces, and so we started Sentinels, I'm pointing to the book over there, in 2018 during the previous administration, and it was a highly contested space. We were following science, as we always do, consensus-based science of what's happening to these trees. But there was also an opportunity at that moment in time to push just a little bit harder than than I would normally do in terms of some of the other things that were going on in terms of politics. And so I must say we kind of finished this project just in time. We have first Native American Secretary of the Interior. Bears Ears has been reopened back up, so to speak, the boundaries, since the Biden administration has come back into place. So, but that's kind of how things began with Gary, and it was just mainly like all the work. It's just a lot of research. You're finding out, okay, if you want to learn about trees, it's Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. That's the place to go. Those are the scientists you talk to. And then if it comes to national parks, Gary's the person, and he has all the contacts for those folks. So when we go to, I think we did a total of maybe 3 different expeditions to Grand Staircase and Bears Ears, once with Gary, once with Garrett, just Bruce and I, to kind of look at these places, kind of through the eyes of just artists, and then also through the eyes of scientists themselves. So, yeah.
And that project really opened up some other things for me personally. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and there's a forest products research lab there that's a federally funded lab. And they have the world's largest selection of wood samples. It's an enormous room with big file cabinets, deep drawers, every drawer is full of wood samples. And there was a scientist there who was willing to give me some time, and so we sat down together. He taught me a lot about, specifically about the pinyon and the juniper. But it was very, very interesting to spend a half a day with this guy looking through all this stuff and just hearing him lecture to me just one-on-one about his experience and his love for the trees. And I came away with a completely different experience and you know, love of these trees that I had never thought about, even though I had been around it, you know, most of my life. So having these kind of doors open through these projects has been really fascinating, you know, and so I think that the idea that we're, like, I just came back from the Himalayas, also looking at glaciers, but I met, again, a lot of the local people, really opened up some doors, and there's a lot of initiative going on over there about climate, and, you know, I was able to get in a room with some of these people and start these discussions about how my artwork contribute to what they're trying to do. So it's very interesting to see how these projects take on a bit of a life of their own, but also what they do. And, like, I mean, coming here and meeting you all and having the opportunity to be in this place and to see all the work in a room together, it's fantastic for me. You know, so it really opens up, what can we do? What's the next thing? You know, motivates me to keep going.
You know, which I really appreciate, but, yeah.
Brings that very annoying question of what's next. But I guess you all kind of discussed that.
I have a question sort of all three of you. There's kind of two theories of how to assist nature. One is by eliminating human beings from it, letting nature take its course and restore itself. Or there's human-assisted restoration, where you're reseeding trees and you're reseeding forests and so on. And I'm kind of curious as to your position on which you think is the most effective way to.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that, to be honest. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think in my work, and I don't know if this answers your question or not, but I'm trying to make something that's compelling enough that people want to come up and look at it. It's a little bit subversive in a way that I'm making pretty pictures about something that's really a crisis. I mean, it's really, this is probably what we should all be paying the most attention to in our lives right now. I mean, realistically, this is major. But I'm making pretty pictures about it. And the idea is I want people to kind of get close enough to it and think about it and go, what is this? Where does this come from? And should I be paying more attention? And let them decide, is it a place I'm going to go to see it before it's gone? Or am I going to write a letter to Washington? Or might I get involved? You know, I don't know.
Ultimately, I suppose
It's a case-by-case basis in some ways. Some places are too fragile now. People aren't allowed to go. They should be kept off limits, perhaps. Some places maybe need the attention of people to, you know, really wake up the masses and say, hey, this is happening. Like, I think in Glacier, for example, this is really happening right before our eyes. But because they're downgraded from glaciers to snowfields, to the naked eye, they sort of look the same. You know, but the people who really know a little bit more than, you know, the surface of it, understand that the ecosystem is changing because it's no longer a glacier. You know, so trying to bring that kind of attention to a place like that is good, I think. So I don't know. I think you're right. It's a loaded question. I'm not sure that I don't know the answer to that really.
Yeah.
For me personally, it's case by case, perhaps. But
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer, and you know, probably my answer would upset a lot of people. I have 2 children, and knowing what I know now, I probably would not have children again. So, you know, we've spent a lot of time with scientists, and they are very unhappy people. They're really sad. And I mean, we're pretty sad people. So it's so, you know, it's, I think there's a lot that can be done. You know, there's a lot of positive to be done. Yeah. And, you know, I feel a great deal of guilt getting on a plane and flying somewhere. And so when I sell artwork, I send some of that money to reforest areas. And that's where I put my concentrate, what funds I have. So I think there's a lot that can be done, but there's a lot of humans. I think there's too many of us. That's my personal opinion. Yeah. Back.
So along those same lines, I've been involved in climate work pretty much my whole life. And recently in trying to make people more aware of what's happening with the climate, because there's so much disinformation and there's been this active campaign for so many years, taking a page from the tobacco industry saying, no, there isn't a climate change.
Yeah.
We made this conscious decision as one of my climate groups to focus on artwork as the way to try to get end to people, to try to open up their hearts and say, because it's the doom and the gloom, they just check out.
Right.
But if you can show them the beauty, and we did it through all the different types of art forms, visual, drama, dance, music. And I just guess my question is, since you're also doing this work, do you think it's having an impact?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I've answered this question personally. I'm interested to hear what these guys have to say. We've been doing this for 10 years, right? And we're this very small little cog in the wheel. There's a large shift in the consciousness in that 10-year time.
Huge.
Huge.
Massive.
So yeah, when we started doing this work, people were like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And now people are like, oh yeah, and there's many other artists working and many people working on these things. And so collectively, as artists, as writers, as reporters, it is having an effect on the consciousness. I definitely believe that people's minds are changing. And so, yes, and the word and Todd, I think, uses the same word a great deal, is empathy. Creating empathy for the natural world through art, through writing, through dance, through whatever it is, but having a consciousness and empathy for that is other than human, this natural world that we need to save if we're going to save ourselves. So.
And I think, though, that one of the things that I really hold on to with our approach in particular, which isn't wholly unique at all, but it's working with scientists. And, social scientists have, empirically verified that when you marry imagery with words, if you can relay risk with imagery, that's the way of eliciting change and eliciting response. And so it's not only, for me, about making the imagery, but it has to be put into context with science of what's happening. Because I don't think my picture on the screen right now would necessarily be the turning point for somebody, but if somebody reads about what that picture is about from a scientist's perspective and look at that, they might, just take it a little bit farther. And it's one of the things that's the beauty of art, is it engenders a larger willingness to have an open and larger discussion about really sensitive issues. It doesn't always happen, but that's what I think we're always trying to do as artists, and sometimes it works and sometimes not.
I went to school a long time ago in Missoula, and it had a forestry school that was well known, and countries of Africa would send students there to study our trees and get a degree in forestry, go back to Africa and help out their people in their country. The country would pay for them. But I always thought it was interesting to me as a teenager in school that their needs with forestry were totally different than ours, and I was always kind of curious how that would mesh. But I saw that the viewpoint at that time, long ago, the idea of the interpretation of locality and the needs of locality are different, like ours from Africa. And I'm wondering, is there a predominance of American viewpoints from your interpretation, or how do you fuse a universal view and interchange with that voice? Do you see what I mean?
I think I
Are
understand.
you conscious of that in terms of
Well,
how you express?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. I mean, one thing that I have experienced is that the denial of climate science seems to be uniquely American. So, you know, Todd and I were in Uganda in 2019, and, you know, we're talking to the guides who do not have much education, maybe third, fourth grade at most, right? And they are absolutely conscious of climate change and what it's doing to the landscape, right? And they are very concerned of what effect it's having on their livelihoods, their everyday lives, how much water they have to, you know, for their crops. And so, yeah, I think it's this kind of denialism it's a Western kind of thing. It's, you know, I've traveled a great deal in Latin America and in Africa, and it's just not even an issue. It's just part of the consciousness that this is happening, and, you know, what are we going to do about it? So.
So they're negating what is happening, actually, right?
Who is?
Iran don't go to the US.
Yeah.
Deny.
Right.
No.
There's one thing I wanted to, it's been haunting me. We're talking about, I think it was when you were in Antarctica,
Yeah.
and they had drilled different samples of the ice.
Right.
And there was one that was, what, 2 million?
3 to 4 million years.
3 to 4 million.
Yeah.
And the climate at that time, was it the climate or the quality of the air?
Yeah.
was
Yes.
What it is here
Pl-
today?
Pliocene, yes.
Yeah.
Same level of carbon dioxide in the air. So when a glacier is formed, right, so if you can imagine snow falling like we see in Montana, right, snowflakes trap air, right? And so if it doesn't melt the next year because the summer is not warm enough, it gets compressed into layers. And so that air is trapped in the snowflakes. And so when a glacier is formed, about 10% of the glacier is air of the atmosphere at the time when the glacier was formed. It is an exact archive. So that air is what it was when that snow fell. So yes, the Pliocene era from 3 to 3.3 million years ago, the particulate content of the CO2 is very similar to what it is now. And so what they're hoping is that it might be able to tell us about what the future holds.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, isn't there some truth, potential truth, but we don't know this because it will be not in our lifetimes or
Right.
our children's lifetimes.
Right.
Will it just?
It will circle back. Yes, absolutely.
You know, so it's, I don't know, so sometimes
To me, the,
how do y'all feel about that?
Frightening part.
yeah.
Question, right?
I mean, to me, the little bit concerning part to me is when civilization kind of began, 10,000 years ago, the sweet spot was right around 300 parts per million. So that's when we flourished as a civilization and started forming cities and started farming and whatnot. And so we were way past when it was a sweet spot where this actually occurred. And so when we're at 417 as of August, parts per million, and we really have to, this is so exciting in terms of it's the missing link because nobody really knew what the world was like, the Earth was like when we were at this level of CO2. And these scientists, they can directly correlate, temperature with CO2, and there's all sorts of fascinating information that's going to be coming out in the next year or so, I think, about what does it all mean?
Yeah, so, I would just say that I don't want to be so depressing, but one thing that I think about is, we think about our time on this planet in human terms. Like, is it 70, 80 years? But if you think about deep time, real deep time, in millions of years, right, we're just a blip, and it will self-correct eventually.
Yep.
It might take 6 million years, but eventually it will come back around, yes.
What we've done is accelerated.
Yes.
That's,
So, I mean, that's what you hear from a lot of climate deniers is, yeah, you know, the climate's always changing, right? Of course it's changing, yeah. That's correct, it is changing. It's the rate of change that's changed. It's how fast it's happening. We've accelerated it, you know, exponentially. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I have maybe more of a comment than a question, but I'm in the exhibition, The Last Glacier. I appreciated that you included one of the wood blocks along with the print so you could sort of see that process, and the materiality and the medium that is part of those woodblock prints. I feel like this goes really well with the subject and the content of the glaciers, of carving out the rocks and you're carving the woodblock, and also the ephemerality of printmaking and paper, and in the museum we have to keep the lights low because it's of the sensitivity, and the glaciers are now sensitive, and so anyway, it just got me thinking about all those things.
Yeah, I agree with you. I liked seeing that process part of the exhibition. I would love to see more wood blocks.
Yeah, and the way these blocks or these prints are made are called reductive woodcuts. So it's the same block for the entire image, and so each time there's a little bit less on the wood, and so as you're doing it, it's exactly like the glacier. That you're just chipping away at this thing until in the end you're left with just the last, what typically would be the darkest lines. But yeah, the whole process is about reducing the amount of information, basically. So it's very much in keeping with what's happening.
And don't you have to work in reverse?
Yes.
Yeah, you work in reverse.
I'm so challenging.
I'm a little bit dyslexic, so it works great for me. I see everything backwards.
It's good for the brain as they get older, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
No Alzheimer's for these guys.
I think that Sarah brings up an excellent closing point in the sense that everything that you are working on conceptually and physically in your work is all intertwined, and it all relates to one another. Very well said, Sarah. She's over there. And I think I'm going to use that as a way to transition out of our discussion, because believe it or not, we've been discussing for a while now, and we're going to close our discussion. But I do want to allow you all an opportunity if you have something else you want to say or other questions in the audience before we close, so that we can have a lovely viewing of the Sentinels book.
Here's a question.
Looks like there's one more question.
As a printmaker, I appreciate the woodblock, but I don't understand exactly what a pigment print is.
It's an inkjet print.
Inkjet.
Inkjet, so it's just a digital print. So, the printer that you get from Costco or wherever that sprays ink on your piece of paper, that's what it is. So
the pigment you refer to is the ink.
Exactly. So it's just a professional level inkjet printer. And that's how you might hear it referred to as a pisography print, or there's some pretentious
G-clay.
G-clay, that's it.
G-clay.
So there's some pretentious names for it. G-clay is the number one.
I think G-clay is French for spit, actually.
Yeah. So it's just a fancy inkjet print is all it is.
Just before we close, just want to say thank you, Nicole.
Yeah,
thank you,
so much.
Sarah. And then I really hope that you might stick around and please come up to the table. We're going to do a page through. We can talk about anything you'd like to talk about on the art, or if anybody has any questions in the gallery, happy to walk into the gallery and talk about anything specific as well. So
Yeah, so please stay if you want to, and
And I'm
take this
sorry if I was a
opportunity.
big downer.